Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Registering young voters for the 1972 election, a national health insurance program for all Americans, and the Nixon administration withholds vital federal funds. This is COPE Report for July 1971. Reports on politics, legislation, and the economy. Vital information for trade union officials on Side 1 of COPE Report.
Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
Bayard Rustin is the executive director of the A. Philip Randolph Institute. Mr. Rustin is a leader in the Labor Liberal Civil Rights Coalition. The Randolph Institute and COPE have worked together often to register voters. Mr. Rustin spoke recently at a conference sponsored by the Randolph Institute and Frontlash on the need to build a coalition with young voters. COPE Report was there.
What is a coalition? A coalition is not made up of people who like each other. A coalition is not made up of people who hold similar views on all things. It has to be made up of people who are poor, and some of whom are not poor, some of whom are intellectuals, and some who could be described as rather dumb. If that is the case, then if we are to build a coalition of young people, we must build it because we are concerned not with what we are concerned with alone, but what in fact they are concerned about.
Mr. Rustin talked about three of the issues that will concern young voters.
All of youth are concerned with the problem of unemployment. Among youth, it now stands at 3 times the national average unemployment. Pay for young workers is low, and the Department of Labor is even now proposing lowering the minimum wage for teenage workers. The fundamental issue on which we are going to get young people out is the economic issue. Then I think young people have to be interested in the Kennedy and Griffith bills for national health security because they contain many provisions which will be of enormous benefit to young people. I think we have to emphasize high interest rates. Young people have to borrow money to go to school. Or if they're young, 21, and married, they have to borrow money to buy a home. And it might interest you to know that with the interest rates we have today, a $20,000 house with a 20-year mortgage will cost you $46,000. This is shocking and must be made clear.
Mr. Rustin foresees some pitfalls for new groups trying to register the young voters.
One danger is that new groups anxious for public recognition and a quick feeling of success will skim the surface of the youth vote in certain constituencies. One typical approach to voter registration by political opportunists has already been to substitute heavy advertising, elaborate public relations, artificial enthusiasm for the more difficult work of coalition building and precinct organization. Woe unto anybody who wastes money advertising that people ought to vote. The way you get people out is a tedious, frustrating process of knocking on doors and urging people to act in their own goddamned interest.
But Mr. Rustin is hopeful about the results of registering young voters through organizations like COPE, Frontlash, and the Randolph Institute.
There is every indication that if we work, then the majority of young people will vote progressively. It is quite clear that if we do not do our job, we are damning them, perhaps, to vote for Wallace and Nixon. Every effort must be made to reach the hard core of unregistered voters in the first attempt. This requires careful planning and execution. One should be skeptical of any crash programs. No crash program ever works. It's a matter of keeping at it. The most effective way of reaching the hardcore unregistered youth is by adding a special youth dimension to the community-wide registration effort.
Along with registration, there is another important job that must be done: voter education. Mr. Rustin feels strongly about it.
More important than anything else, I think we have got really to do the job of voter education. I cannot emphasize it too much because there are so many confusions. When it comes to whether we're going to get health care, when it comes to whether the ghettos can be rebuilt, when it comes to whether we get new towns, when it comes to whether the children in the ghettos are going to be educated as well as your own, as to whether the blue-collar worker is going to be able to pay for his home. All of these things do not depend on anything other, finally, than the vote.
In our hands is placed the power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of millions magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever.
Quality health care for all Americans has long been a goal of the trade union movement. Now that goal is within reach. The AFL-CIO has strongly supported the National Health Security Program introduced by Senator Edward M. Kennedy and Representative Martha W. Griffiths. To find out how much medical care costs Americans, COPE Report talked to Bert Seidman, director of the AFL-CIO's Social Security Department.
We are now paying billions and billions of dollars for medical care. The entire cost of medical care in this country was $70 billion last year. The Kennedy-Griffiths bill would cover 70% of what is called personal health expenditures, which is the bulk of that $70 billion. Now, we are already paying for that. We are paying for it out of our own pockets. We are paying for it through payments to insurance companies and the Blue Cross and the Blue Shield. And the federal government is paying a considerable proportion of that, as well as state and local governments. But the financing of the Kennedy-Griffiths program would be by a different method than the way we are financing medical care now, a fairer method and a more effective method.
Mr. Seidman explained how health security would control costs.
It provides for pre-budgeting of the cost of medical care, for example, for hospitals and nursing homes. It provides for encouragement of prepaid group plans, which have shown by their record that they are able to control costs. It puts the emphasis on preventive care and care at the early stages of illness rather than during the later stages when hospitalization and surgery would be required, which is the most expensive kind of care. And in these various ways, it would tend to hold down the cost of medical care.
Haven't private health insurance companies control medical costs? Mr. Seidman.
The private insurance companies have been in this business for a long time. So far as we can see, they have not exercised any control over costs. They have done nothing whatsoever to provide incentives for quality care. They have simply taken the money that has been provided by employers and employees and have passed that money on to the providers of care, the hospitals, the doctors, and the other providers of health care without any controls whatsoever. We see no reason whatsoever to think that their record would be any better under any kind of a national program such as President Nixon has proposed.
Speaking of the Nixon Health Program, Mr. Seidman, exactly what is it?
As a matter of fact, to call it the Nixon Health Program is kind of a misnomer. It's really 4 different programs with 4 different levels of benefits, 4 different standards of eligibility, 4 different administrative agencies. One program is intended for workers and would require both employer and employee contributions to the program. Another program is intended for the poor. That's a lower level of benefits, and at very low incomes, those people would be required to pay considerable amounts of money. There'd be still another program, the continuation of Medicare for the elderly, and the Medicaid program, which we now have for poor people, would continue for some poor people, that is for the elderly, the blind, and the disabled. But there would be many people who wouldn't be covered at all. Part-time employees would not be covered. The unemployed would not be covered. Migratory workers would not be covered. These are groups obviously in particular need of coverage of their health care needs, and they would be completely outside any of these Nixon programs.
Mr. Seidman, what benefits would be provided by the Kennedy-Griffiths bill?
Under the Kennedy-Griffiths bill, there is one standard of care for everybody in the country. The same comprehensive health services would be available for rich or poor, employed or unemployed, people on welfare or wealthy people. There would be the same standard of benefits, comprehensive benefits available for all.
The Nixon administration is withholding $12.8 billion in federal funds Congress has appropriated for various programs. The administration says that to spend the money would feed inflation. AFL-CIO Legislative Representative Ray Dennison has other ideas.
We have a situation in our country where unemployment is beyond the 6% level, where in the construction field there's approximately 11% unemployment at this time. So it seems to us that the way to move the economy at this critical moment would be to expend funds that have already been appropriated by Congress. But it seems clear to us that the decision has been made to, in effect, stash away these funds. $12 billion is a great deal of money. To stash away these funds until they can be doled out piecemeal between now and Election Day to achieve a maximum economic impact at a time when the maximum political effect is being desired.
Mr. Dennison, have other presidents withheld spending appropriated funds?
Now, we must, in all honesty, say that the withholding of funds is not something unique to President Nixon, but where it is being done in this case, it's being done as a counter move to inflation. And we say that that argument just does not hold water. In World War II, President Roosevelt withheld funds based largely on his war powers and deferred projects that he felt would have siphoned off funds from war-necessary projects. So that's a different kind of a judgment. It's our position that in this case there is absolutely no justification for withholding them.
The administration is asking Congress to give the states and local governments $5 billion under its so-called no-strings revenue sharing. At the same time, they're withholding $12 billion.
Here is the president withholding $12 billion in funds, and yet the vice president and the president and members of the administration have been touring the country saying that we want your support, that is, of state and local officials, in behalf of revenue sharing, which would mean $5 billion. So we find that to be somewhat ironic. If the state and local governments are in dire need of $5 billion, they are equally in dire need of $12 billion.
What is the effect of not spending this $12 billion now, Mr. Dennison?
We are not only stopping necessary programs, but we are also going to be feeding the unemployment situation. These are not programs that are going to start tomorrow when the money is released. Many are ongoing programs, have been in effect for years, and they will have to be halted. People's lives will be uprooted. The embargo of funds has had a total community impact, slowing down community development efforts, creating chaos in their plan development, accentuating local economic problems. Timetables for public and private development have had to be altered. Contracts with private companies have had to be delayed. Sites for development have been lost. Prospective developers have been turned away. So you see here you have a ripple effect going on all over the country as these programs are being disrupted and people are being forced into unemployment, and as a result, all of these programs will cost more money in the long run.
Mr. Dennison, what programs are being affected by this $12 billion freeze?
$191 million of this money goes into the Appalachia area, where, for the most part, that is backcountry road work and things of that nature. Those are being halted. There's a special milk program. There may not be any jobs at all involved there, but it's a milk program for children. REA loans have been stopped, and these mean the extension of electrical wiring and power into rural areas that could generate potential industry and jobs in the long run. There are rural water and waste disposal programs, so you have the pollution issue involved here. You have forest roads and trails involved. I might just add one additional point. The president recently said that they were carrying out a crash program in behalf of cancer, which we certainly support. And we notice that among the funds that are being withheld in the National Institutes of Health are funds for disease and stroke, medical science, the Eye Institute. Programs of this nature are being stymied because of the withholding of these funds.
Mr. Dennison, what is going to happen to this $12 billion which the administration refuses to spend on needed projects?
$12 billion is a considerable slush fund to use in a campaign year. What we have here actually is a manipulation, a callous manipulation of the federal treasury as a political tool in preparation for the '72 election. We hope that the pressures of Congress will be kept on the president, and we hope that the funds will be released, and all we can do is join our fellow Americans in urging the president to release these funds. And as I point out, there are other remedies, including Election Day 1972.
In our hands is placed the power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of millions magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the Union makes us strong.
A callous manipulation of the federal treasury, a health program for all Americans, and the 18-year-old voters. This has been Side 1 of COPE Report. On Side 2, a program designed to be played at local union meetings with Representative Carl Perkins, chairman of the House Education and Labor Committee, AFL-CIO President George Meany, and labor economist Nat Goldfinger. Reports of importance to union members and their families. On COPE Report, Side 2.
For the Union makes us strong.
AFL-CIO President George Meany.
We are not isolationists and have no intention of becoming isolationists.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. If the boss is in the way, we're gonna roll it over him. We're gonna roll it over
The world trade situation and the U.S. economy, and a congressman's view of the Nixon education program. All on COPE Report for July 1971. Reports of interest to trade union members and their families.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on.
The world economic scene of 1971 is altogether different from what it was in 1934 or even in 1960. Changes in world economic conditions require changes in the United States trade policies.
That was AFL-CIO President George Meany speaking at the International Ladies Garment Workers Union Convention. He explained why U.S. trade policy must be modernized.
The United States' position in world trade is getting worse. This country's share of expanding world exports has been declining, and at the same time, imports of all kinds of goods have been mounting. Unfortunately, this is not a temporary situation. It is not going to go away. Since World War II, most countries moved to manage their economies. As part of such national economic management, governments have direct and indirect subsidies for exports and barriers to imports. Obviously, countries have every right to protect and advance their interests as they see them. But such subsidies for exports and barriers for imports are not free trade. Moreover, such policies are one of the reasons for the flood of imports into the United States, the most open market to imports of all major industrial countries. At the same time, the expansion of United States exports is held down by direct and indirect barriers imposed by other governments.
In addition to the flood of imports, there is another major change in the world trade picture, the skyrocketing investments of U.S. companies in foreign operations. President Meany.
These investments, combined with patent and license agreements with foreign companies, have transferred American technology to plants throughout the world. Many of these plants, operating with American machinery and American know-how, pay workers as little as 15 cents an hour. Such operations of American companies obviously displace U.S.-produced goods in both American markets and in world markets. They export American technology, some of it developed through the expenditure of government funds paid for by American taxpayers. And they are exporting American jobs. When a California knitwear company set up a plant in Mexico, 200 workers in the California plant were laid off. The same story can be repeated about plants in all parts of the country, adding up to tens of thousands of workers losing their job.
American workers are the best customers for American-made goods.
For decades, 95% of the articles that we can produce in this country and have produced have been purchased by the American people, not by foreigners. So carry this philosophy out to its ultimate conclusion. You ask yourself, Where comes the purchasing power to buy these things, where thousands are laid off and the labor transferred abroad? These are the issues that require immediate government action.
Then President Meany outlined the broad goals of labor's trade policy.
We are not isolationists and have no intention of becoming isolationists. We support the orderly expansion of world trade. We oppose the promotion of private greed at public expense or the undercutting of the United States wage and labor standards. We want expanded trade that expands employment at home and abroad, and that improves living standards and working conditions here and abroad. We demand that the United States government take steps to protect the interests of American workers against the export of American jobs.
President Meany recommended 4 steps to stabilize the world trade situation.
Specifically, we say the United States government must stop helping and subsidizing United States companies in setting up and operating foreign subsidiaries. The government should supervise and curb the substantial outflows of American capital for the investment of U.S. companies in foreign operations. And again, the government should supervise and curb the export of American technology by regulating the foreign license and patent arrangements of American companies. And they should press in appropriate international agencies for the establishment of international fair labor standards in world trade.
World trade imbalances are only part of America's economic problems. For details on the total economic picture, COPE Report went to Nat Goldfinger, organized labor's top economist. We asked him, what is the condition of the economy?
We have a continuation of both inflation and rising unemployment. Unemployment is now up to 5,200,000 people jobless, and that's almost twice as high as it was back in January 1969.
Mr. Goldfinger, the Nixon administration is blaming workers for inflation. Who is really at fault?
Workers and trade unions have been blamed for inflation before, but if you look at the record, you find that when workers are pressing for wage increases, what they're pressing for is to catch up with previous inflation that's been wiping out the buying power of their wage increases of the past few years. The real problems in this economy in terms of inflation is once again in the record. Look at bank profits, which have just skyrocketed out of sight in the past couple of years with high interest rates. Before that, look at the tremendous rise in the cash flow to corporations, which soared 91% between 1960 and the middle of 1969.
Mr. Goldfinger told COPE Report what could be done to curb inflation.
I would say the following 3 steps are at least a minimum. First, to cut interest rates, which would reduce costs and prices throughout the economy. Second, to increase sales and production. This would improve the efficiency of production and reduce costs. Third, if the president determines that it's necessary, the AFL-CIO would cooperate with mandatory government controls, provided that they're on all costs, all prices, and all incomes, including profits and dividends and executive compensation, as well as on wages and salaries.
Mr. Goldfinger, what are the facts about the current unemployment situation?
Well, unemployment's continuing to increase because sales and production aren't high enough. We have slack and stagnation throughout the economy. Industry today is operating only 73% of its capacity. The unemployment situation was terrible in many places throughout this country. For example, over 11% of construction workers were unemployed in May. Also, 11.5% of unskilled workers were unemployed. 9% of semi-skilled workers. Out of the more than 5 million unemployed, over 300,000 professional people, scientists, engineers, and technicians were unemployed in May. Unlike previous recessions in the past 25 years, unemployment this time has hit all segments of the population. Of course, it's continued to hit the trade union members and the working people, the unskilled and semi-skilled, hardest. But it's also hit the skilled workers, skilled building tradespeople in particular, and this time it's spread even to the scientists, engineers, and technicians.
Mr. Goldfinger knows what legislation is needed to get people back to work.
The AFL-CIO has made quite a number of suggestions. One key one is for the government to adopt a public service employment program, which was passed by the Congress last year and then vetoed by the President. This would provide federal money to the states and the local governments for the creation of jobs in providing badly needed services like parks, recreation centers, libraries, hospitals, and so on. A second thing that we have urged very strongly is the adoption of an accelerated public works program where the federal government would provide $2 billion to local governments and to states in areas of high unemployment to step up their public works construction and repairs. Then, of course, we need reduced rates of interest. Reduced interest rates would stimulate economic growth, and particularly the housing industry, which is very badly needed by the American people. It would increase the number of homes and apartment units, which all of us need.
I'm standing on the picket line 'cause I want a living wage. We'll stick together through the wind and the weather. We'll get that living wage. On the line, on the line.
President Nixon has proposed that federal funds for education be given to the states as part of his revenue sharing plan instead of federal grants for specific projects. COPE Report asked Representative Carl Perkins of Kentucky, chairman of the House Education and Labor Committee, for his opinion of the Nixon proposal.
Similar proposals have been considered by the committee in the past several Congresses. Minority members of the committee on previous occasions sought cutbacks in consolidation of ongoing programs, leaving it up to the states to establish priorities for the expenditure of federal education dollars. In the past, these have been referred to not as revenue sharing, but as either block grants or consolidation grants. I believe that when it is fully known what the administration proposal contains in the so-called special revenue sharing legislation, it will be soundly rejected by the public and by the members of Congress.
Representative Perkins, how are federal education funds administered now?
Presently, the Congress has authorized under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 $9.5 billion annually to support education programs in our grade and high schools throughout the nation. Of this amount, $6 1/10 billion is distributed to local educational agencies according to a precise national formula which guarantees the local educational agency an equitable share of the federal support funds. For the most part, the remaining $3 3/10 billion is distributed according to a precise formula to state educational agencies for the state's distribution to local educational agencies.
How would the President's revenue sharing proposal for education change this? Representative Perkins.
The President's proposal would repeal these authorizations and substitute authorizations calling for an expenditure of $3 billion annually to be distributed according to the discretion of the U.S. Commissioner of Education. By law, the administration cannot withhold funds appropriated by Congress which are to be allocated among states and school districts according to a statutory formula. If our present laws providing support for education are repealed and the so-called special revenue sharing proposal is substituted, not only will schools be losing $9 billion of already authorized support for a $3 billion program, but also the administration can withhold appropriated funds for special revenue sharing. Our nation's schools are in desperate need of financial support and federal programs to meet these needs. The Congress must provide year-to-year assurances that the funds will not be cut back.
What do the members of Congress think about revenue sharing? Representative Perkins.
Now, none of us are against revenue sharing when in reality it actually amounts to true revenue sharing. But the revenue sharing that we members in the Congress would like to see would be not to destroy effective and efficient programs that are operating so well at the local level, but give the local governments, the cities, the metropolitan areas, and the rural areas that are really in need money on top of the present programs without destroying the effectiveness of the programs that deserve top priority at the local level. And I think this is what the local people back home want us to do. Let us not give some money to the local communities in lieu of the present programs, which in reality means shortchanging the local communities.
Well, every union's helping out on the picket line. Across the country, north and south, on the picket line. On the line.
This has been COPE Report for July 1971. Next month, more up-to-the-minute reports on jobs, education, health care, safety. Reports on issues of importance to union members and their families on COPE Report.